Hello, YouTube. Hold on, let's see, Mike. Yeah, so I'm back after so long. Okay, welcome back to my channel. Been on a long hiatus from posting frequent videos. It's June 27th, 2023. Like I had said in the past 30 videos, that if you watch my intensely, extensively drawn out library of videos on my channel, you may notice, or even just skim through them, you may notice that I definitely have talked about so many different things related to mental health, regarding what has been the mental health of all humans and of all living creatures in the world throughout all of history, how I've given my takes on it, how I brought up other takes on it. I've went through so many videos over such a long period of time doing so. I've talked about it in so many videos in great length, put hours and hours into videos, and I think it's safe to say that I've made a lot of progress. For those who are more familiar with my channel, you already know that I'm really way past that. I've been way past that for a long time now, having done those things. But today, I finally decided to pick up the YouTube channel again, because I just thought of something really interesting I can make a video about. There's not much more I can talk about on the channel, obviously, that would be worth me bringing up, by the criterion standards which I've argued for years now on this channel, that I've shared on my channel. However, it's finally dawned on me something that I've been missing all along on this channel, is this. This whole thing here is something that most people who I've argued and criticized on my channel for so long, which would be the majority of humans throughout history in the world, would turn to this manual and these sorts of government level websites to actually criticize mental health on such a widespread scale as the entire world, rather than all the hundreds or thousands or millions or however many it were articles or sources of information I was sharing throughout the course of my channel up to this point, all of which were plenty reliable, plenty reputable, and probably countless of them were referencing this website itself anyway. And definitely were at least agreeing with a lot of what this article says to begin with, because not just because of legally, but morally. And I've gone over for a million times, a million years ago, it would seem, on this channel, why that's what I was expecting, and I've proven why that's what you should expect from the majority of reputable sources of information on the internet about mental health, or even not on the internet, such as books, for example, about mental health. But either way, I have talked about this on my channel at some point within the past 100 videos, multiple times, of course, about how turns out that I might actually have to resort to breaking down every single concept at some point for all the critics of my theory that every human in history has been mentally ill. And like I said, I've given mountains of evidence of it on my channel for a very long time now. Many, many times. But the thing is, how do I put it? Now has come the time for which I finally realized that I'm actually going to I actually have decided to put forth the video that I've been hinting at for so long, where I would do it, where I'd actually break down every single concept in mental health that would be needed to be every concept that is in mental health that would be needed in order to understand why every human in history is mentally ill. Because when I was breaking down countless concepts in mental health in in all of my videos prior, I only broke down the concept so much, but you have to break every concept down to the most they can ever be broken down. The same way to really make people understand how a contraption or device works. Deconstructing it halfway isn't necessarily enough for them to fully grasp how it works. But if you deconstruct it 100%, it will work in making them understand what the contraption or device truly is and see how it works. So it's the same with this. Same logic applies to this. I've talked about this so long ago, many times. So I kept saying that I was hoping it wouldn't come to that, but it might. I was saying it might come to that. So now I'm going to give. This is like the highest order of the highest order website for this. Again, it even says an official website of the United States government. Okay. The official. That's why I looked up the official mental health criteria for understanding for delusion. And what do you know? It says it's talking about the official DSM-5 criteria, the official Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, literally published by the National Library of Medicine. It's the highest order of the highest order, government level website, article, whatever the heck. You can click on here's how you know. So yeah, I mean, here we go. Okay, so here's the thing. For the longest time, a lot of these things in this article I've already been pointing out throughout many, many, many videos a long time ago on this channel, which are still up today. And like I said, I gave a lot of evidence, gave a lot of proof. But here's the thing. Like I said, the problem is in that I have to deconstruct every idea, or at least I have to guide the viewer through the process of deconstructing every idea within the entire premise that I'm postulating here, being that every human in history and every living creature in history, for that matter, has been mentally ill and has to have been delusional, having to have met the criteria for various mental illnesses, neurotypicals being no exception. I've ranted about neurotypicals to holy hell. You would, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a slogan of mine on this channel, using how much I've used that word and that term as a kind of group of people in the world throughout history who I've been criticizing for so many things. not just neurotypicals, of course, because I've criticized every demographic, every single background of human life for how they are in terms of their mental health. And I've been giving evidence that despite all of that variation, all the variations of cultures and backgrounds, they're all mentally ill. But so yeah, that's the thing. They at least match, and I've talked about how they match I've long since talked about and proven how they match the criteria for multiple mental illnesses that are, some of which are the big mental illnesses that most people know of and can recite. But one of the best ones I can use here with what we have here is delusional disorder. So because it is okay, so delusion, blah 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 blah, talks about a little bit about delusion. Delusion is a belief that is clearly false, that indicates an abnormality in the affected person's content of thought. So that right there already tells you that. And then we take into consideration how high up and reputable this website is, and how much all people of the world confide in these things that are said here. How much trust and faith has always been in this website or in government level websites is absurd. Ancient religions have done the same thing. Ancient religions literally get on their knees and do the business, if you know what I mean, for the higher authorities in the government, okay? They even admit it, and that's in terms of what they, how much they just, how much they devote their thinking and their behavior, and how they run things, and how they always have, to the higher authorities, the government, because really they're all pretty much one and the same. They're all the higher ups themselves. They do it for themselves. They do it for the lower classes, for different for not for all the same reasons, of course, but still, they do it for the corruption of the world, and so to keep people being the whole world being mentally ill without even knowing that the whole world has been mentally ill. They don't know it, and they haven't ever known it. As I've said many times on this channel, since seemingly the beginning of it, I'm like one of the first people in this world to have ever exposed the fact that all human life and all life on Earth has always been mentally ill. So, yeah, but obviously, it says a false belief is not accounted for by the person's cultural or religious background or his or her level of intelligence. The key feature of a delusion is that is the degree to which the person is convinced that the belief is true. A person with delusion will firmly hold a belief regardless of evidence to the contrary. Delusions can be difficult to distinguish from overvalued ideas, which are unreasonable ideas that a person holds, but the affected person has at least some level of doubt as to its truthfulness. A person with a delusion is absolutely convinced that the delusion is real. Well, what can I tell you? I mean, you can go back to every single video, or you can go back to even just one or two videos of mine and cherry pick sections of each video, sections of videos, or pick any video you want out of my library of videos, or just to cherry pick to find where I literally give mountains of proof over and over from countless sources of information, not limited to just books or movies or documentaries or articles, but so much And you can cherry pick that stuff if you want, as much as you want, until you're convinced that I've already given mountains of evidence that people do meet that criteria that it says right here of a delusional person. A person with a delusion, it says right here, a person with delusion is absolutely convinced that the delusion is real. And says delusions are a symptom of either a medical, neurological, or mental disorder. So, and what have I done? I've given you plenty of evidence in my videos over and over of people of religions being neurotypicals holding to the view that delusions are being completely convinced that the things they believe are real, even though not every religion can be 100% true. You have all these different major religions throughout history, and some of them have better things to say than others, but ultimately they can't all be 100% infallible, and they all have contradictions in what they say to each other. One religion says this guy is God or the Messiah, and this religion says it's this guy, and this religion says no, it's this guy. Then you have 1,000 or 1,000,000 religions all applying that same sort of vicious cycle, and before you know, you have 1,000,000 religions throughout history, or millions of religions throughout history, or whatever, how many it is. It's seemingly countless, of course. And regardless, you have all these religions. I've talked about this 1,000,000 years ago on this channel, but again, I reiterate again that they can't all be correct. They have too many contradictions to each other's claims and arguments and the lore. But every person who holds to their religion, whichever it is amongst those, will say that it's absolutely 100% true, and in such a way they will say that it must show that they're absolutely convinced, just like it says here, absolutely convinced that what they're believing is real. But that's the thing, they can't all be true, so there must be some of the religions must be, at least some of those religions must be wrong, and some of the religions must include delusion being as it says here, a belief that is clearly false. Okay, because again, the you have to remember that the religions can have truth claims, and you could have two major religions, for example, and one religion can make a truth claim about who God is, and then as a person, if you're trying to personify God, and the next religion out of this list of 1,000,000,000,000 religions in history that we cherry pick from says, oh, God is actually this person that I'm personifying, that is being personified. So, but let's say if we say that one of them is right and the other is wrong, then we're saying that the one that is wrong is asserting that a delusion is actually not a delusion, is trying to advocate for a delusion being true, because it just simply says all it takes to be a delusion is that it is clearly false, and it indicates an abnormality in the affected person's concept of thought. So it's basically saying that any idea that is false, and as long as the idea is false, it must be mental illness. As I read earlier, let's go back to where it says that. Delusions are a symptom of either a medical, neurological, or mental disorder. So it says it right there. So, and it's in right here again. I'll go back one more time. Delusion is a belief that is clearly false. The false belief is not accounted for, blah, blah, blah. So, all false beliefs, all of them are clearly false, and they are a symptom of either a medical or neurological mental disorder, no matter what. So, even according, and this is all according to, again, the very websites, the very authorities that the highest of that all the major religions are so subservient to. They're so subservient to the government. They say it in the text, in the ancient text. They say you should be subservient to the authorities, and says that the authorities, such as the government authorities, are always the most knowledgeable about what's going on as far as how people think and behave, how the general populace thinks and behaves. And so it pretty much is just, there's that, and then there's just, you can ask anybody off the street or any group of people off the street if that's true, and they'll say it is, and they'll also show you that they also just independently think that government level websites have to be highly reputable. You can tell that's what they think by their behavior and how they think and socialize in society, and how that's always been the case all throughout history, in every era of history, in every century. You can try it in anywhere in the world to test that stuff out, whether it was in the past 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it doesn't matter. It's always the same. I've given evidence of it a million times, a million years ago. It's what it would feel like because of how long this channel has been around, how much I've done this on over and over on this channel. So that already pretty much solidifies my argument. But like I said, I've solidified my argument a million times on this channel. Like I said, this video is about how that's not enough, because I have to also I have to deconstruct every single meaning of every single term I'm using on this website. So I'll just have to keep going further and further to deconstruct all the ideas I brought up that we evaluated within these paragraphs so far, until there's nothing more to be deconstructed, and everything has been narrowed down in such a way to where it must point to what I'm saying being true, even in the minds of my viewers and the critics and all people of the world who would think that I've not been right all along. So, now, here we go with, it says history. They're giving you some historical history books, social studies words, I guess, about the origin of the word delusion. And it says, let's just move on to this. It says, delusion is a basic phenomenon. It's the primary task to get into this view. So, and so it says, whether we like it or not, the unavoidable field of tension in which research on delusions is situated has to do with how we think about our reality. It says, a tight, objectively oriented conceptualization on the one hand, and the basic anthropological dimensions of subjectivity and interpersonality on the other hand. Even if one is skeptical about these basic aspects, delusion is never a mere object which can be objectively detected and described, because it evolves and exists within subjective interpersonal dimensions only. This reminds us on a central topic of psychiatric research. There are two fundamentally different approaches to research on complex mental phenomena, be they normal or pathological. First approach, the naturalistic one, regards the complexity and scientific means to study delusion and temporary phenomena. It says this solution or this approach, the naturalistic, uses a strictly empirical neuroscientific and has progressed far enough to replace mentalistic vocabulary with a neurobiological one. In other words, mental events are not regarded as a distinct class of phenomena, either gradually or principally. Eliminative materialism is the most radical position in this context, which declares terms such as intention, willful action, individual values, personality, or autonomy to be a part of folk psychology. So, according to this approach, the terms may well be useful socially and on an everyday life basis, but not scientifically. And they will be replaced, eliminated by the language of neurobiology in the not too distant future. So, basically, the first approach uses neurobiological concepts and vocabulary to describe the psychological phenomena of delusion in regards to mental health, as to try to describe the criteria of mental health. And the other one is, it says here, is not so much using neurobiological research strategies at all. But, it already had me at the fact that it's not using neurobiological research strategies as much as the first one. It's always a safer bet to use something well established like neurobiology for a psychological study, especially one as massive as the one I'm doing here. So, yeah. And that's so let's keep that. We can keep that in mind, just as the article says. To do. So it says descriptive phenomenological approach. The approach to understanding delusions is a very influential one for psychiatrists. I'm not familiar with this book, General Psychopathology, by this guy named this famous mental health professional, but I'm sure that many people are. But from what I'm getting of it, it has a role in helping us deconstruct everything we need to deconstruct here. So I have to include this in this demonstration here and read it out loud, just as I have the other stuff. And the book marked a major step forward in establishing psychopathology as a scientific discipline, experiencing mental states by the patient, and the understanding of this experience by the physician define the central framework. In contrast to biological phenomena. So now we already got a problem because we're having a contrast to biological phenomena. Remember what I said earlier. When we have well-established biological phenomena in fields of study that literally are proven to be well-established and trustworthy within all kinds of areas of life, and the job market is just one of them. So you'd actually have to be a major skeptic of what is happening as far as the fundamental framework by which you're learning how to do your job that involves biology as a well-established framework and scientific framework, that already is a red flag. But we still have to deconstruct this, because if people and my viewers or whatever don't understand what is being said here, then they're going to misinterpret it, perhaps as maybe that it's saying something that I'm not, or bring up a relevant point that I'm not. I don't want, and so we'll just have to deconstruct it. It says, or I'll have to deconstruct it here. It says, however, in contrast to biological phenomena, mental events can never be accessed directly, but only via the expressions on the person who experiences them. So somehow it's trying to say we cannot manipulate mental events directly. We can only access them through the expressions, how people express themselves. So phenomenology is the study of subjective experience. It is one's empathic access or understanding of the patient's experience. So it's basically the study of what a person believes is happening. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is something I would have disagreed with. And if you watch a lot of my previous videos, you would understand why. Because I was always taking a biological framework to heart in my investigations, arguments, and studies. And in the videos, I would show that in great length and detail. And it doesn't help that this guy was saying that you can't use biological phenomena in such a way that you can directly access what's going on in people's minds. So it says, one enters into the other person's experiences using the analogy of one's own experience. So it says the guy distinguishes between static understanding, which grasps particular psychic qualities. Blah, blah, blah. Phenomenology is static understanding. Phenomenology is one's recreation of the patient's experiences through transferring into, empathizing with, or literally feeling into or living with the patient's experiences. So basically, it's just a person's interpretation. Phenomenology is describing what happens when a person tries to understand another person merely through interpretation, and they try to do the interpretation through empathizing with the person, or empathizing with the person. It says they're empathizing with, feeling into, or living with the patient's experiences, as if they're a psychic. This sounds pretty hogwash. In this way, one arrives at an actualization, representation, or bringing to mind of the patient's experience. I mean, I don't know about you, but this sounds like hogwash compared to the things I've been saying. But I can admit at least that there's some truth to it, that people do that. They do try to understand others by empathy. I've gone over why empathy is not as good as compassion. on this channel before in older videos, and so you can check that out if you want to see why I think that uh, the approach of empathy, or what in this case is described as phenomenological approach, is not all that great compared to compassion. So if it's empathy, at least defined as how I criticized it in my older videos, and then it's not as good. Or if it's so much if this phenomenological approach is so much more about accessing events through interpretation, through trying to make a compare, trying to I don't know, if a person tries to imitate the person they're trying to understand in order to understand them, is basically what this approach is. And it's I can see why that's not the top approach. Even says here the second approach is Jasper's phenomenological approach. The first approach is a naturalistic one. It uses the complexity and heterogeneity of scientific means. Well, it says this solution, according to the naturalistic perspective, will only be used until a strictly empirical neuroscientific approach has progressed far enough to replace mentalistic vocabulary with a neurobiological one. So it's basically saying that they're basically trying to say that the second best solution is using science to understand illusion, instead of saying that it's the first best. Whereas I'm saying the first best is science, and this is saying the second best is this is, but this is saying the second approach is actually the first best. So phenomenological, just imitation. Try to imitate the wild animal. It's pretty funny. Try to imitate the wild animal running around in the forest to understand it. is basically the logic of it. Instead of trying to dissect its brains in a lab, or trying to understand its neurochemistry, or or to understand the neuroscience of its brain, how about you just get on your all fours like a dog, and you'll understand the dog, is basically what it's saying. So it's saying it's basically saying you can, it's also saying something else here. It's quite interesting. It says it does not exclude neurobiological research strategies, but it insists on using the subjective dimension instead of. Okay, so it's basically saying the best approach is to try to imitate what you're trying to understand. So yeah, I don't even know where to begin to explain why that's not true. I mean, other than to just say, I can reference you my millions of videos where I go over why that it does not make sense to do in comparison to dissecting the brains or dissecting things. uh, like in the medical field, which is actually well established in the medical field to help diagnose things. Like, it's basically saying the phenomenological point of view is closer to just pure psychology, whereas the first one is more biology and neurochemistry. So, which I understand completely. I've gone over in great detail how the two approaches work in trying to figure out what to diagnose mental illness, to recognize it, to diagnose the mental state of a living thing in the world. But honestly, I'm just not even going to go over this one again in this video unless I absolutely have to, because I've already done so many times on my channel prior. In prior videos. I've done that so many times. So, moving on, we have the concept of form and content. So, following the theory of knowledge of the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Basically, this guy is like a philosopher, is what it seems like. And it says Jasper accepts that all experience or knowledge entails both an incoming sensation and an organizing concept. So, I mean, it's true. Because, you have a concept and you have a sensation that goes with every concept. They go hand in hand. In the physical world, you have physical sensations, and all the physical things in the physical world are conceptual in nature. They are you can conceptualize of them. For example, you have a tree. It is you can conceptualize of a tree, so it's a concept. It says it's an organizing concept. Yes, and trees are organized of their components to form the tree. But it says that Jasper accepts, at least, that all experience or knowledge entails both of those things. The former is matter or content. The latter is form. The empiricists, whoever they are, emphasize incoming sensation exclusively. The rationalists emphasize the organizing concept. So it's basically just telling us how the different approaches to different famous approaches to the interpreting what is form and content. What are those two things? I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of stuck on why they even brought this, or why exactly they're bringing this up. Other than, of course, there's a lot of people who might be wondering why do so many people throughout history believe what they do about what physical things are, from a philosophical, from these famous philosophers and from famous religious doctrines. So it talks about that here because they are referencing guys like Descartes, Immanuel Kant, that other guy, Leibniz, whatever. And just those are just some good examples on their own of major famous philosophers. But anyway, moving on, it says all experience and knowledge entails the two stems of conceptual form and intuitive content that will be crucial for Jasper's concept illusion. So concept. So yeah, this guy Jasper just would rather use his psychology and other psychology and as the primary means by which to assess this matter of what is delusion and what is not delusion. Whereas the other approach, actually is willing to take not only the psychological approach, but also take the every other approach in combination with the psychological approach, which is far less risky and is also far more valid, reliable, and accurate in its assertions. Because if you try to use pure psychology to figure out psychology, it's pretty circular. Or if you try to use psychology but leave out a bunch of the parts of, say, neuroscience that go into making the psychology happen, then you'll have a lot of questions begged but never answered, because there will be mysteries that can't be solved about the psychology, mysteries which were caused by the neuroscience external to the psychology, that you would be saying are not at all in any way responsible for the psychology, even though it turns out they were responsible for it. So it's really it's just a dismissive perception of delusion to say that you can it is purely psychology and it has nothing to do with neuroscience. So basically, it's just telling us that there's two main ways the world has always gone by which to interpret how psychology can and or is determined to turn out in the world and in all of existence. And basically, I've talked about this, and this has been talked about all throughout history anyway. But I've talked about this a lot on my channel, about how most people in history, being mentally ill in the ways I've diagnosed them with on this channel for many times, have actually, because of their mental illness, which is neurological, by the premises I've put forth, if we're going by those, it would be neurological. And if it were, that neurological illness would be something that can be scientifically proven and even empirically proven to actually physically exist in the world and be in such a way that you can actually detect it with medical equipment, and that it can be detected with all sorts of equipment, and it can even be detected with many various sorts of technology, and already has been, whether people have realized it or not. So for that reason, it must be the case that for that reason, obviously, what we're actually looking at is just it giving us the typical runaround, where we're told that there's two types of people two types of humans throughout history. One is an intellectual and it says only one of them can be the true intellectual. One of them is the true intellectual, and that one is not the one who says that neuroscience is the cause of is really behind the psychology. and that it has nothing. It is not so much science as it is psychology. Well, that's the thing. Then you have all the videos, all the criticisms before my videos, before I was even born. But then you have all my criticisms of that notion on this channel, and you have all the criticisms out there ever of that notion. And so, that's the thing. So it's basically telling us that this guy Jasper, with his phenomenological argument about delusion, basically just subscribing to major religions about how they would say that mental health is not really about hasn't really anything to do with neuroscience or the brain and mental health in general doesn't have very much to do with it, or that it has nothing to do with it. That's one type of human in the world, and that has always been the majority of humans in the world. Okay, as I've proven many times, a long time ago on this channel, and I've been doing that for a long time on this channel. However, if that's all that is going to be talked about Jasper in this article, I'm tempted to just skip over it. But as I said, I'll keep my word. I'm going to deconstruct every single word, sentence, paragraph in this article for you guys, because apparently nothing else has worked, seemingly. So this guy is just basically typically the equivalent of someone who was how do I say it? One of those genius, high IQ members of society in a prior century of ours, to ours, that who was very good at making people believe that he had something to really say that was really actually super undiscovered, or really something that hasn't been discovered before, like some new level of genius. But no, it's more of a scam, because honestly this guy is basically just regurgitating what most humans in history have been regurgitating due to their own neurological mental illness, which is that psychology is not determined by neurology. It's just purely psychology, and that's all. So, this warped perception of self, and it's all it really is with most people in history. As I've said, they have not understood or thought very critically or deeply about things as far as what is the mind, what can it be, and I think that's the furthest they've ever gotten with it, is the questions of what is the mind, what can it be, to which they would say physical or non-physical, or both, to which they would have said non-physical, or both. In most cases, they would have just said it is non-physical. So, yeah. It's, I've had my phase on this channel where I've just went through so many reasons why the mind is more likely to be physical. I've held to that view on this channel for a while now. There was, ironically, there was phases on this channel where I was someone who argued for why the mind can be, why the mind is both, and there was even a phase where I argued for why I thought that the mind was non-physical. However, after years of developments and reevaluations of arguments and claims and criticism I've received from others and that I've given to others, I've connected the dots quite a lot to realize you can watch all of this progression throughout my videos of me doing all of that stuff, that actually the mind makes more sense to be physical. But again, they're only bringing this up at this point in the article because they want to establish that they just want to establish, for those who don't know, that these are the two main ways to interpret psychology. That is, if the mind is physical or non-physical. Because if it is physical, then we should turn to not Jasper, but the first guy. It says here, the naturalistic one. Not guy, but naturalistic method, which is to use neurology, neurobiology, neuroscience, neurochemistry, all that good stuff. To use that instead of the second approach, which is the phenomenological study of psychology that is most prominent for most people throughout history, which I've been criticizing, obviously, on my channel more heavily than that of the neurobiological naturalistic approach. Because honestly, for as long as I've been on my channel, I have been actually advocating that the brain controls mental health, and that mental health is determined it can be understood through the naturalistic approach, that mental health is a product of neurobiological processes. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's this, as I said again, I reiterate, this is just a small chunk or section of this article, just to clarify for the unenlightened few people in today's century, day and age, who wouldn't already know that those are the two ways to think of psychology. It's either a product of neurobiology or just pure psychology, with little to no neurobiology ever involved. So honestly, you can pretty much dismiss a lot of the other stuff it says about it, because even this is, like I said, the concept of form and content is just what the phenomenological approach of pure blissful ignorance to neurobiology, as I've proven countless times on my channel before this video, and as others have proven a number of different ways prior to my channel even being born. So to speak, born. I mean, I would say born rather than created. And I just want to mention that I received a lot of criticism on my channel for doing so, but it's funny, people have not believed in the naturalistic approach, but yet they work jobs, and always have worked jobs in the medical field, where they actually have to assume that the naturalistic approach is actually true. It's like 1 minute, and I mean, I've obviously mentioned this a very long time ago on my channel. many times about how you have people in the medical field literally being convinced when doing the medical stuff that they're doing on the job, or even just learning it in college or whatever level of schooling they're in, that somehow it must be true for what they're reading and learning to be true, and whatever their actions or work they're doing, that somehow neurobiology is actually what determines psychology. And yet, later, whenever it is they want to have it be, they will deny that that's the case. Because later on, they will say they will insist that that it must somehow be true that what do you call it that what their religion tells them, what their religious book taught them when they were a kid, or what their church tells them on Sunday, or whatever religious text they've held to their entire life, or that their entire family tree is held to, or whatever the hell, they insist that that says otherwise, and then they want to side with that. It's like they choose sides on a whim. On a whim, they literally choose sides. I mean, now maybe I'm wrong here, a little bit wrong here. Maybe you could say that they don't actually trust in the work they're doing, as far as saying that it is indication that what the work they're doing on brains, brain matter, is determining the mental health of the people who have those brains. Well, I can see why someone might think that, or might suspect that being the case. However, as I've talked about many times before this video, long before this video, on this channel, that simply can't be true, because people actually think that have actually been convinced that the work they're doing must somehow control mental health, because they would at least have to accept that there's some kind of correlation that is proving to be there when they test it out with the medical procedures and tests being done, and the textbook, and they have to, I mean, I sure you could say they don't really believe it's true what they're being taught in the books, but are just, willing to actually learn how to do the procedures and memorize the terms and terminology without actually believing that it's actually determining psychology. But for that to be the case, they'd have to be pretty crazy, because they'd have to believe that it's nothing to do with neurology, and it's just pure, or neurobiology, and that it's just how people are acting is just purely them pretending to be certain ways, or that they are, or perhaps that they are mentally ill, but it has nothing to do, there's no correlation, at least to the neurobiology. So it's pretty stupid, it's pretty dumb, either way, whether they actually believe, whether they actually interchangeably change their ideas on a whim about whether or not neurobiology determines or correlates to mental health. I mean, they're at least willing to accept that it correlates to it, because they test it out for themselves with mental patients, and it proves true. but you could still argue that the mental patients, that they think that the mental patients are just um, are mentally ill, and it's not really the neurobiology so much as it is just the pure psychology. It's like, as dumb as the argument is, it's like saying that psychology determines itself, but or like a thing can create or determine itself. Like, it's just so dumb, but they'll just dismiss that, deny that that's what they're saying, even though that's literally what they're saying. But I mean, obviously, um, I can see how it's possible that, like, somehow maybe some of them are willing to believe that it's possible. A rare few throughout history, rare handful, have believed that neurobiology actually causes mental health. It isn't just merely correlated to it. But yeah, I mean, they're probably not convinced by the idea that just because there's a correlation, that it is actually a causation as well. A direct causation, that is to say, that neurobiology has a direct cause upon mental health. Seems far-fetched to them, but could actually be the case. It actually makes more sense to be the case, and is a safer assumption because it's a scientific assumption. I mean, in other words, it's an assumption. If it's an assumption, at least it's a scientific one, rather than a purely biased one that's based off of nothing but psychology that's observed from biased perspectives, that doesn't want to use science at all in doing so, or neurobiology, even though that would be the only way to really determine if it's the cause or not. So it's pretty stupid, but at the same time, like, I can still see how maybe one might argue that maybe it's convinced some people throughout history that maybe some people throughout history have been convinced when doing the medical procedures that it makes more sense to be neurobiology determining the psychology. But yeah, it's been rare for that to happen. So yeah, but anyway, moving on. It says all this bullshit and crap, it's just talking about how psychology is this and that, and it's not neurobiology to turn to try to figure out mental health, as much as it is the other thing. And in the opinion of Jasper, anyway, in the opinion of the famous philosophers in pop culture and in American history and in world history, like, so we can skip over that. It says the forms of belief. Jaspers distinguishes 4 forms of belief. So, I mean, here's the thing. It's basically just telling us about the rational and irrational forms of belief and how they manifest into consciousness. But we really don't need this, because I really don't need this for my demonstration here because it's honestly pretty redundant. Because all it does is just tell us what famous philosophers and the vast majority of people think about beliefs, or in about delusion-based beliefs. It's not really necessary because we already know, and we know why it's brought up in this article as it's the same reason I said earlier. It's for those very rare few people in history who would never have been educated enough to know what the two main views of humans are and have been of what determines psychology. Is it the physical matter is it physical stuff in the world? Is it non-physical stuff? Is it both? And to what degree is it physical or non-physical if it is both? So, it says delusion-like or overvalued ideas. So, it says this standard view has difficulties with a wide variety of strange beliefs, some of which are examined below. Are they delusional or merely overvalued? Well, isn't overvaluing something delusion in and of itself? It would be pretty funny if it turns out that the criteria they write in this article, in this paragraph, for overvaluing something actually matches the same earlier criteria mentioned above for delusion. Because it would mean that the writers of this article are saying that delusion is overvaluing ideas. Yet here in the beginning of this paragraph tries to say that there's a distinct difference between them, which is pretty stupid and would just point to the writers of this article or of these articles also being mentally ill, just as I have proclaimed them to be countless times on my channel prior to this video. The standard view, blah, 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 it says, on the above three external characteristics plus understandability, they can certainly look very much like delusion-like ideas, but the logical implication that this means a diagnosis of psychosis is unacceptable and requires some very deft intellectual footwork to avoid are not the disordered beliefs of body image in anorexia derived from the fear of gaining weight and the preoccupation with food, and if so, why do we not consider them to be delusion-like rather than overvalued? Why do we not consider the catastrophe beliefs and severe obsessional states to be delusional-like? Catastrophe beliefs are closely linked to the underlying compulsions, and such patients do not believe that a failure to carry out the ritual and such patients do often believe that a failure to carry out the ritual result in some dreadful catastrophe. So, Beck and his associates have described a range of abnormal cognitions consequent on depressive and anxiety states. We would regard many of these depressed patients as neurotic rather than psychotic depressives, but nevertheless they have very compelling automatic thoughts and negative schemata of failure, hopelessness, and helplessness clearly linked to their mood disorders. Can the beliefs of... Okay, so a further example can be found in pathological gambling. Although the experienced gambler knows that the casino game is rigged against him and in the long term the house must win, he continues to believe in his own luck. Wagoner found a web of illogical cognitions in compulsive gamblers. Many were magical in quality, and some actually made it more likely that the gambler would lose. At roulette, a game of chance entirely, players had a strong tendency to leave their chips on a winning number on the grounds that it was lucky. they lost, they tended to put their chips on numbers that they have not yet won. Backing a number adjacent to it, arithmetically related to the winner, meant their luck was returning. Wagonar points out that few numbers are not related either by proximity or by arithmetic, so that the gambler can always delude himself that his luck is rising, then a win is imminent. So it says, moving on, it says Walker's proposed that a number of ideas, both inside and outside psychopathology, have at least a prima facie, whatever, case to be considered delusion-like. They fulfill the three external characteristics, and they are understandable in terms of unusual, if not psychopathological experiences. So, and number two, an intellectual sleight of hand is often in operation in the distinction of overvalued and delusion-like. If we intend to make a psychotic diagnosis, then the belief is delusion-like. If we tend to make a non-psychotic diagnosis, then the belief is overvalued. Phenomenology is molded to fit. So, yeah, the phenomenology, which also happens, let's not brush this under the rug like they want us to, like they would want us to here in this article, reading this article, clearly, that would rather cut out neuroscience from the equation, rather say that neuroscience can't be used to figure out if the mind is physical or non-physical. So, and the fact that it's saying that it can't is really stupid, because if it turns out it can, and it just dismisses it and automatically assumes it can't without ever trying ignorantly, then there's no reason to trust the phenomenological argument over, neuroscience, just fucking neuroscience or neurobiology. And so this article just throws you through loops, runs you on a hamster wheel about some things, obviously, because it really, really wants you to think everything through about how the phenomenological argument is really, really, really really influential, and really so influential that you should expect a lot of people to believe and have high faith in it, and that most people have had high faith in it. And anyway, so it says for Jasper, the important distinction is not between overvalued idea and delusion-like idea, but rather between delusion-like idea and primary delusion. Jasper's terminology has importance for his account. Only the primary delusion is a delusional idea proper for him, and the delusion-like idea is, as its name suggests, not a true delusion, but merely delusion-like. So, and it says, Jasper makes no real distinction between the overvalued idea and the delusion-like idea. There are several reasons when he simply equates the two. So, this guy is just being 1 minute considered the best approach by this article. If you can recall, some time ago when I was talking in this same recording, I pointed out in above parts of this article, if we scroll up, you can notice where it says that the phenomenological approach is better than the naturalist approach, according to the opinion of the writers of this article, which is the government. And then, now down here it says, it talks all this crap about Jasper and then in the phenomenological approach, saying that this guy is really, really, really bad at making distinctions between delusions delusion ideas and overvalued ideas that aren't considered delusion by by a lot of people, or some people. So, but the problem is just that, because you need to establish what is delusion and what is just mistaken with good reason for delusion. And this guy clearly fails to do so, and they clearly care to admit it at this point in the article, but not so much where they were saying his approach is the best approach. And now it says the essential characteristics of delusion. Wow. So they still have more to say about Jasper, what Jasper thinks. Oh boy. It says Jasper's solution to the problem of delusion is as follows. If we want to get behind these mere external characteristics of delusion into the psychological nature of delusion, we must distinguish the original experience from the judgment based on it. The delusional content says presented data from the fixed judgment, which is then merely reproduced, dissimulated as occasion demands. Essential criterion distinguishing the different forms of belief lies not in their conviction and certainty, not in their incorrigibility, not in their impossible content, but in their origins within the patient's experience. So, regardless of what they say about Jasper here, I'm not interested, and you shouldn't be either. And the rest of this is just more Jasper. Okay. So, the rest of this is just Jasper on using extensively long sentence structures and walls of text to describe things where it really shouldn't take all that much for what we're talking about here. But conveniently, it seems we found the gold mine of this article as far as Jasper goes, because here they conveniently show us a summary of some of the important things Jasper believes, which, I hope is at least going to take us further, closer, faster to what I really want to accomplish here in this video. Jasper's distinction between unmediated or direct and mediated or reflected phenomena. Unmediated direct experience versus thought-mediated experience. So, one experience is direct, the other is maybe indirect. So, you have an ordinary mistake. This is... It's basically saying the person has a true hallucination, and the hallucination is an image projecting itself elusively in space. Wow. So, yeah. And so I'm guessing this ties in somewhat to the things he said. It says primary delusion is the experience of delusional meaning. So, the experience of meaning is implicit in all perception, and it is distortion of this implicit meaning which is the primary delusional experience. Jasper's begins with examples from mundane perceptions. All thinking is thinking about meanings. Perceptions are never mechanical responses to sense stimuli. So, yeah. Now he's basically talking about subjective experience, because he's talking about perceptions. He's talking about that again and again and again. And so he's basically saying that basically giving some kindergarten, pre-K level understanding here of things, which I'm not even going to bother going over because it's pretty much safe to say that this guy has nothing relevant to say in terms of truly challenging neurobiology or neurochemistry or neuroscience. As I've said many times on this channel, very long ago, proven this guy and all guys like him, they were famous philosophers or famous teachers or whatever, or cult leaders, whatever they were, to the naturalistic approach versus the phenomenological approach, did not do much for it other than regurgitate for the phenomenological approach. Just simply because that is what they were brainwashed and programmed to. They were brainwashed and programmed to think of it. So at the time. So yeah. Anyway. Now we have the structural dynamic approach. So that says this time we're not talking about Jasper, thank God. Okay. The German psychiatrist and psychopathologist Jan Zurich developed his theory of structural dynamics. It is an interesting and underestimated approach to the understanding of psychotic disorders beyond mere operationalism and beyond psychoanalytical interpretation. Mental life, healthier, discussed, or disordered. Jan Zurich differentiated between structural components that are rather firm and long-standing, such as basic ideas and values. Yeah, but this guy just doesn't give, he gives like maybe some good references by making comparisons from objectively true psychological experiences that more people could agree upon or concept or understand about what is delusion and what is mental health in terms of psychosis. But does he actually give us a neurobiological approach to proving that neurobiology determines psychology? Not too sure about that. It doesn't say. I'm not so sure it says he does there. Now we have an anthropological and whatever that is approach. And it says this guy was Binswanger, whatever the heck. It says that one must deal with human existence as a whole in order to understand its particular abnormalities. Uses pathological terminology. World design is a term which reflects the organization of all the conscious and unconscious attitudes of a human being towards all that is sensible. He tries to characterize mental disorder as some single fundamental disturbance. And he thinks that all such disturbances are spatio-temporal in nature. By this he means that the patient with the delusion of persecution is no longer able to perceive the chance nature of all that happens around him, owing to a feeling of restriction of freedom movement, spatio-temporal disturbance, and so refers it all to himself. Thus, in the delusion of persecution, what the patient wants is not a feeling of benevolence towards him, but a feeling of ease and freedom. He says that delusion is not a product of an ill. He says the delusion is a product of an ill, not a normal person. Okay, so, yeah, this is hogwash, because, I'm already done past the point of arguing why the average person. The average person must have been mentally ill. Who is a normal person? Normal people have always been mentally ill, and he's also just saying that he's just kind of like beating around the bush and like tiptoeing around neurobiology, um, with like like in a really bizarre way, you could say. Just like give like some more psychology, deep evaluation, psychological evaluation of mental illness, but it's really ultimately not, you know, like we don't need it for this investigation of mine because it's, it doesn't add anything to it that I haven't already brought up. So, in this ongoing investigation that has been going on my channel for years. So, biographical approach. Yeah, so I don't see anything here that speaks of in those paragraphs here that speak of neurobiology, psychoanalytical approach. I've talked about this guy Sigmund Freud on my channel before, and so I don't have to talk about him again here, other than how he is just yet another famous name in pop culture and in influential American world culture who just reinforces the idea that not all people have been mentally ill, and that most people have not been mentally ill, even though the truth is that that's a lie and all people have been mentally ill. Neurobiological approach. So this is the gold mine. Okay, are you ready? Let's read it. This still is no comprehensive neurobiological theory of delusion, formation, or maintenance, according to this article. Okay, you know what? It says, so this is the problem I have. This is the problem of all of this. We have to dissect why neurobiology can and is possibly behind psychology. So yeah. So this is just going to be full of lies. This entire wall of text about neurobiology is full of lies. Not all of it, but it's a lot of lies, because it's just criticizing so much about neurobiology that isn't giving so much ridiculous nonsense about it, saying that it's not there's not enough to say definitively that it actually is behind psychology. So I mean, it's saying that there's some correlation, but well, it says there's some evidence that they do have a correlation, at least, but it's not necessarily saying that neurobiology, but it's definitely not saying that neurobiology is the sole cause of it, of psychology, because anyway, it says analytical philosophy of mind, linguistic approach. Yeah. Just another runaround we don't need for the investigation. Hallucinations, well, I mean, we need all of these, but not really for this video, other than to show you that it's just a runaround. Hallucinations. What do we say? Hallucinations. I mean, another runaround. This. Yeah, so this might actually be good. Because this guy actually is willing to